Cars have evolved a lot over the years, but one thing hasn't changed: their value. Even cars built 60, 70, or 80 years ago can sell at an auction for millions or even tens of millions of dollars. That's why today we're going to take a look at the most expensive cars of every decade sold at auction. We'll even take a look at a car that sold for more than $35 million. The 1900s Rolls-Royce 10 HP two-seater, 1904, $7,254,290. In 1904, there were 0.67 cars per 1,000 people in the United States of America. For a bit of reference, today there are around 1.88 cars per household. What is now a necessity was once a luxury, only attainable by the wealthiest of individuals in America. And the Rolls-Royce 10 HP two-seater was a vehicle that only the wealthiest of the wealthy could actually afford. Produced between 1904 and 1906, the car was sold for £343, which, adjusted for inflation, would equal well over $55,000 today. That'd get you a nice car with touchscreens, heated seats, and even parking assist now. But back then, you were getting far, far less than that. The 1904 Rolls-Royce 10 HP two-seater, registered as U44, sold at auction for an astounding $7.25 million. Why such a high price, you ask? Well, mainly because it is only one of four that's believed to have ever survived. It has a 3-speed transmission and a twin-cylinder engine that is water-cooled. The power output is 12 horsepower at 1,000 RPM, and it has a top speed of a whopping 39 miles per hour. In other words, if you wanted to take this bad boy out for a race, you'd be easily smoked by a guy riding a horse. 1910s Rolls-Royce 40 to 50 HP double Pullman limousine, otherwise known as the Corgi, 1912, $7,343,000. For the 1910s, we have none other than a Rolls-Royce 40 to 50 horsepower double Pullman limousine. The model that sold at auction for a startling $6.3 million is known as the Corgi. The name aside, the Corgi isn't a car made for the dog days. It is a nearly perfect example of the coach building abilities of the 1910s. The interior is full of surprises. There is a dome light accented by an elaborate fabric rosette. All the hardware within the car is made of either silver or ivory, and the door panels are made of embroidered silk. The footrest conceals a picnic and tea service set. Of course, for tea service, you would need hot water, and this stagecoach has that covered. It comes with an alcohol-fueled burner to boil water. However, if you're looking for something a bit stronger, well, look no further than the set of 6 decanters, which are made of sterling silver and leather. 1920s Mercedes-Benz 680S Torpedo Roadster, 1928, $8,226,400. When you picture the 20s, you might be picturing flappers, jazz, and good times. Well, I'm speaking of the 1920s, of course, since the 2020s haven't been particularly kind to us thus far. The 1920s were a decade of prosperity, innovation, and success. So, it may come as no surprise that there were some pretty snazzy vehicles that came to be during that time. The Mercedes-Benz 680S Torpedo Roadster is one such car, especially the 1928 model that sold for a whopping $8.25 million. The car has a 6-cylinder dual carburetor engine. The coach was filled with lightweight open coachwork, crafted and designed by the world's finest coach builders, made particularly for wealthy individuals who desired a high-quality vehicle with flair and impressive performance. The materials used to make the car are exotic, including a lizard skin interior and a Purple Heart trim wood, a rare wood that was sourced from South America. This specific 1928 vehicle has a life story that adds to its value. It's only been owned by 2 families in its nearly 100-year existence. That careful ownership ensured that the vehicle was already top condition before experts painstakingly restored it. 1930s Alfa Romeo 8C2900B Lungo Spider. 1939, $19,800,000. The 1930s were not generally a time of luxury. In fact, they were pretty much anything but luxurious. The Great Depression affected nations around the world. Many people were unemployed, many were starving, but some still managed to find some comfort in fancy cars. The Alfa Romeo 8C2900B Lungo Spider is one of those cars. A 1939 8C2900 sold at auction for a startling $19.8 million, which might be a little less shocking when you take into consideration the history of the car. For starters, only 32 2.9 chassis were made, and only 12 are the touring Spiders. The few surviving cars are highly sought after, especially by sports car enthusiasts, because my, is the 8C2900 a sports car? At the time, it was the most advanced modern sports car in existence, and it was also the most aerodynamic. Its framework consisted of incredibly thin and hollow steel tubes, which were housed within panels of aluminium. Fabric was used in between the hollow tubes and the aluminium, preventing electrolysis without adding much weight. Although, don't ask about the flammability. This allowed the car to be molded and curved, making it one of the first vehicles to be this streamlined for racing. Of course, the engine helped a bit with the racing as well. The 8-cylinder engine has dual Roots-type superchargers, and it's claimed that the car has a max speed of 109 miles per hour. 1940s Alfa Romeo 6C2500 Competizione. 1948, $4,840,000. The 1940s was a whirlwind decade that was both marred and defined by World War II. However, the next car on our list was made after the war ended, in years where recovery, reconstruction, and pretty cool car making were happening. The Alfa Romeo 6C2500 Competizione is perhaps the most rare car on our list. Only 3 were ever built, and today only 1 survives. So, it shouldn't be entirely shocking that the car was sold at auction for an astounding $4.8 million. If you know Italian, the name may give you a pretty good indication of what the 6C2500 Competizione was all about, because Competizione translates to competition. The 6C2500 was a race car, and frankly, a bit of a Frankenstein's monster kind of car. After the war, Alfa Romeo realized that their older racing car, the 8C2900B Berlinetta, was soon going to be outmatched by race cars built by Ferrari. But with little money and resources, they weren't going to be able to build a car from the ground up. Their solution to their problem was digging through corporate part bins to get the components needed to clamor together the 6C2500 Competizione. That being said, they picked some pretty fine parts. The car has a 2.4-liter 6-cylinder engine and is said to have around 145 horsepower, with a max speed of 124 miles per hour. 1950s Ferrari 335S Spider Scaglietti. 1957, $35,711,359. Alfa Romeo was worried about Ferrari outmatching them when it comes to sports cars, and they have had reason to be, because the next car on our list was, and still is, a fairly impressive vehicle. The Ferrari 335S Spider Scaglietti was produced between 1957 and 1958, with only 4 cars produced in total. That rarity is a huge part of why one of the remaining cars was able to sell at auction for a whopping $35.7 million. But the rarity isn't the only reason this sports car had such a high price tag. In 1957, there was an Italian race known as the Mille Miglia. In that race, a 335S was the vehicle involved in a fatal accident, which resulted in the death of 16 people and the injury of 20. It also meant that the 1957 Malay Mia was the very last to ever take place, leaving this car and the race in infamy. The surviving car that sold for over $35 million has a V12 engine, a maximum horsepower of 390, and an impressive maximum speed of just under 190 miles per hour. 1960s Ferrari 250 GTO 1962, $38,115,000. The next car on our list happens to be the most expensive car ever sold at auction and is arguably the most sought-after collector's car on Earth. That car is none other than the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, which sold in Monterey for a startling $48.4 million in 2018. In fact, this car is so well loved and valued by car enthusiasts that when the 2018 sale took the lead for the most expensive car sold at auction, it stole the title from another 250 GTO. Even more incredible, it's been reported that another 250 GTO was exchanged in a private sale of upwards of $70 million. So, what makes this car so special? Interestingly enough, the car wasn't always highly sought after. Produced to be a no-frills race car, only 36 total were made, and they were sold for four-figure sums in the United States. When collecting classic cars rose in popularities in the 1970s and 1980s, the GTO's racing history and design made it highly sought after. When the GTO was hitting the racetrack, it was mainly only hitting the racetrack with other GTOs, solely because few other cars could even compete with it. A quick look at the specs will tell us exactly why that is. The 250 GTO had top speeds of 174 miles per hour, and it cranked out an impressive 302 horsepower. What a beauty. 1970s Porsche 91710 1972, $5,830,000. Ah, the 1970s, where the clothes were funky and the cars were even funkier. The most expensive car of the 1970s ever sold at auction is none other than the Porsche 91710, which sold for $5.8 million and is certainly a funky little car. I mean, just take a look at that thing. An open top, splashes of red and blue, that massive spoiler, that build that resembles a somehow very aerodynamic brick. Well, the 91710 was built for one purpose, and one purpose only: to win. Well, I suppose I should say to win so Porsche could promote the new Porsche and Audi dealerships in America. And what do you know? The car did just that. The 91710 has a 12-cylinder V180 twin-turbo engine and a top speed of around 220 miles per hour. Those specs are what brought it to victory in dozens of races. In just one US circuit alone, it took the title in 6 out of 9 races. 1980s Porsche 956 1982, $10,120,000. I shall tell no lies here to you, my viewers. The 1980s were my favorite decade. The music slapped, as the kids say. The fashion was loud, and the cars, well, the cars were even louder. And one car that stands out perhaps the most is the Porsche 956, especially when you consider that a 1982 Porsche 956 sold at auction for $10.1 million. The 1980s saw racing rules and regulations change pretty drastically and pretty frequently. The 956 was created in response to some of these rules, made to classify as a Group C vehicle in racing and replace the incredibly successful 936. And since this car was made for racing, very few were produced. Of the 10 that were created total, the car that sold at auction was lucky number 3. But the few cars that did race performed incredibly well. Made of a lightweight aluminium chassis, the Porsche was propelled to victory by a 2.65-liter turbocharged engine. It had top speeds of 218 miles per hour. The 956 led the 24 Hours of Le Mans race for the full 24 hours and took its third victory in that race. Several other victories followed, but a fatal accident at the 1985 1,000-kilometer of Spa led to safety concerns, which eventually put an end to the 956's racing career. 1990s McLaren F1 LM-Specification 1998, $13,750,000. Finally, we're getting into the 90s, which I assume most of you were around for. If you weren't, I must commend you on taking an interest in luxury and success at such a young age. I'm sure you have a bright future ahead of you, full of fancy cars and beach homes. And perhaps, well, even you'll one day be able to afford the next car on our list, the McLaren F1 LM-Specification, which sold at auction for a brilliant $19.8 million. The price of this car can be heavily attributed to the fact that only 2 were ever built. The standard F1s regularly sell for upwards of $10 million and are considered one of the best cars ever created. But these special LM specifications are even more sought after. The 2 F1 LM specifications, chassis numbers 018 and 073, started as standard F1s, but were later fitted with V12 engines, providing more power than the standard models. Chassis number 073 sold at an auction for $13.75 million. However, the highest selling of the pair, chassis number 018, is the one that sold for $19.8 million in 2019. The 018 was refinished in 2000, which included painting the exterior platinum metallic and retrimming the interior with cream leather and Wilton carpets. 2000s Ferrari Enzo 2005, $6,050,000. And now we've reached the 2000s, the era of low-rise jeans, Canadian tuxedos, and pimp my ride. However, you certainly won't need to pimp this ride. If you're a car enthusiast, you may have already guessed the car from the 2000s that sold for the most at auction. It's none other than the Ferrari Enzo, which sold at auction for $6 million. That is one of the lower numbers on our list, but when you consider that this car hasn't crossed into vintage or antique territory, well, the price certainly fits. Who knows how much they'll sell for 10, 20, even 30 years from now. The Ferrari Enzo is named in honor of the company's founder, Enzo Ferrari. Only 400 of the cars were built over 2 years of production, and their design was actually inspired by the McLaren F1. The Ferrari Enzo has a V12 engine that produces 651 horsepower and can accelerate from 0 to 60 in just 3.1 seconds, crossing a quarter mile in just 11 seconds, with speeds reaching as high as 218 miles per hour. So, there you have it, the most expensive cars of every decade. Which one of these was your favorite, and which one would you like to invest your money in? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Oh, and maybe turn on post notifications. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take my Aston Martin out for a little spin. As always, I'm Mr. Luxury. Pip pip to doodly doo.